Welcome, welcome, welcome all of you who are just joining us right now. You are very welcome all over the world, and looking forward to have a successful dialogue today. You are all welcome, and we'll be starting in the next 45 seconds. We would like to start our webinar and dialogue today, the 2nd of June, 2021. But before we begin, I would just like to do some housekeeping so that this webinar goes on smoothly. I want to request each one of you to choose your language of choice using the interpretation option, which has got the globe icon at the bottom of your screen. This event today has got a simultaneous translation into French. So please choose whichever language you are most comfortable in.
Alors, bonjour à tous et à toutes merci beaucoup d'avoir rejoint nous. Ce dialogue aujourd'hui bénéficiera d'une traduction simultanée de l'anglais vers français. Alors, pour utiliser cette fonction, veuillez cliquer sur le globe dans la barre inférieure de votre écran sur Zoom et puis sélectionnez votre langue préférée, s'il vous plaît. Merci beaucoup. T-Rex.
Thank you. Once again, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you're joining us from. As we start, we'd like to encourage you to introduce yourself in the chat box so that we may know you and be able to network among ourselves. This event today, it's just about an hour and a half. And during that time, we shall have 20 minutes at the end for a time of questions and comments. You're welcome to submit any questions that you have in the Q&A box, which you can see at the bottom of your screen. We'll try as much as we can to answer some during this event in the box, and also we shall engage our panelists at the end. You may also want to engage and bring insights into the chat. Remember, this is not just another webinar, but rather a dialogue. Your voices are very critical in terms of the process today. Additionally, just to remind you, there is also a chat box that you're welcome to use to the right, but we ask you that you use the Q&A box for any questions. Also for you to note that as part of the dialogue process, we shall have polls. You shall be involved to vote concerning the opinions you have on critical issues in this webinar. Also note, ladies and gentlemen, this event is being recorded, and we'll send a recording to registered participants after this session. My name is Rex Chapota. I'm your host today. I work with Farm Radio International as a senior advisor for strategy and growth, but also I'm a UN food systems champion on the role of communication for development. Therefore, without wasting time, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to introduce to you the issue of today. This webinar is really part and parcel of the dialogue processes that are happening under the United Nations Food Systems Summit. As some of you are aware, UN Secretary General confirmed to the world that the issue of food systems is crucial for delivering all the sustainable development goals, and that indeed all of us ought to participate. That's why, as you are here today, this is not just part of an event. This will help us as stakeholders to better understand and manage the complex choices that affect the future of food systems, and indeed to accelerate the progress toward the achievement of sustainable development goals. Also, just to remind you, ladies and gentlemen, that on the 26th to the 28th of July 2021, there shall be a pre-summit where the issues and discussions here will also find their way there, as we're looking at the game changer solutions to inform investments in the sustainable development goals. Therefore, as we start today, our theme for this webinar is who is missing at dinner, bringing farmers into the conversation on food systems through inclusive communication platforms. To start this conversation, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to welcome our Executive Director at Farm Radio International, Mr. Kevin Perkins, to say a few words and indeed intimate to us why Farm Radio was motivated to host this dialogue this afternoon. Kevin.
Thank you, Rex, and thanks to everyone who is joining this webinar, this independent dialogue for the UN Food System Summit process. It's wonderful to have so many people involved in this conversation. The focus of this dialogue is on the role of communication in developing a just, sustainable, healthy food system. The title, Who's Missing at Dinner, reminds us that more work is needed to bring the voices of farmers into the conversation about food systems, and to ensure that all people are getting the information and participating in the dialogues that they need to thrive. If you'll indulge me, I'd like to draw parallels with some other systems. Let me start with a collection of systems that's very important to me, obviously, and all of us, and that's our muscular, skeletal, circulatory, respiratory, and even digestive systems. And let's not forget the communication network that makes them all function smoothly, the central nervous system. It sends messages and instructions and feedback from one part of each system to the other, telling us when we're hungry and full, when we feel sick. Our bodily systems would not function at all if not for the signals and messages that are communicated through our nervous system. Another parallel is forest ecosystems. There have been fascinating discoveries lately of the critical role of underground mycelium networks in keeping forests healthy. They allow trees to share nutrients, but they also send messages from one to many, signaling when some trees are in need of help from their fellow trees. So yes, even forest ecosystems depend on strong communication platforms and networks. Now, a healthy food system is all about the connecting role of communication. Like the nervous system in our bodies, it links various parts, producers to buyers, suppliers to producers, and so on. Communication systems, they exchange knowledge, share ideas, send messages, provide feedback, express demands, and stimulate action, all critical to a strong, sustainable food system. And food justice requires that communication is equitable, that the communication platforms serve everyone equitably. But sadly, we're far from that. So much work is still needed to ensure that all people can access their right to information and expression. as they participate in a strong and just food system. This dialogue will explore some of the exciting work that is being done and that can be expanded in the future to ensure that all farmers are at the head of the dinner table, especially when talk of food systems is on the menu. So let me take a moment to thank in advance our wonderful panelists. I very much look forward to hearing from you and from hearing the comments and questions of all participants in this webinar. Thank you very much. And with that, I'll pass it back to you, Rex.
Indeed, rightly said by Kevin, we don't have a food system without the voices of farmers. Inclusion is critical, and indeed all the parts need to fit together. So this food system summit, and indeed the importance of communication cannot be overemphasized. As some of you are aware, there have been over 150 independent dialogues under the UN Food System Summit, and none of them has been handling the issue of communication. Therefore, this discourse today is very, very critical in terms of informing the kind of investments that can be done in food systems. Actually, the issue of inclusive communication platforms is one of the major areas that cuts across all the tracks of the Food System Summit. Therefore, this is a great opportunity for all of us to be able to bring to the fore the critical issues surrounding communication platforms and the role it can inform to have equitable, just, inclusive, and healthy food system. Actually, as Farm Radio International, beyond this dialogue this day, we are already working in a number of countries to have real dialogues with farmers through the airwaves. And indeed, those dialogues that we're working in partnership with the International Fund for Agriculture Development will be part and parcel of feeding into the game changers to be presented at the pre-summit from 26th to the 28th of July. And indeed, today, it's an interesting time for us to start the real conversation. And what is interesting today is that as part of our panels, we are bringing in a virtual panel in the form of videos. We have got interesting videos coming all the way from Africa, in West Africa and others in other parts of Africa, so that we can appreciate what is really inclusion in terms of ensuring that all voices are heard in this discourse. Therefore, as we start today, we'd like to start with a video from a farmer from Mali that indeed brings about what these issues are all about, and this was collected last week. Let's have a video from Mali as part of this dialogue this afternoon.
Gouvernement ta brango ya demeni bon o bena ko be demenge bon demain yere semante gan sagola parce que ni mo na ka bi deme abena fengi mi besi bono goro bo bena deme go bolo ma deme bena fen bena minti siga ta so do frega soroga da kun be mo gala ko bena demenge me deme mi bena akoni i bala matsigi ni misi wasa ala misali mi season selega yer la na machine chamandi au Sénégal au Canada le Sénégal au comment bon wari yera bula Sénégal tse ka sa
Wow. And on this note, and indeed in the spirit of dialogue, we'll start everyone off with a poll, because we want each one of us to participate. And our first poll is a question on what do you think development organizations are doing? Are they doing enough when it comes to communicating with farmers? Do you think development organizations are doing enough when it comes to communicating with farmers? You can choose any option there by a click of a button, and I'll give you 30 seconds to do this process. Thank you. We're waiting for our results. Wow. This is interesting. It rightly shows that this dialogue is important today because we are not doing enough in terms of engaging with farmers. And that's why 70% of us are saying we're just doing a little, but not enough. And based on this finding, which is indeed the truth, why we brought you together today to discuss about inclusive communication pathways, I would like to invite to our first panelist today, who is Helen Papper. Helen is the Director of Global Communications and Advocacy at the International Fund for Agricultural Development. She has a long background working in information and communication systems, as well as peacekeeping at the UN. And before that, she had a very good experience as a seasoned journalist in conflict and post-conflict zones. But before we get to Helen, we'd like to start with a bit of music. Let's listen together.
We seem to have had a brief technical difficulty there, but Rex, are you able to introduce Helen?
Yes, please. My connection had a problem. So moving on this afternoon, I'd like to introduce once again Helen. And indeed, Helen, as we start this afternoon and morning, depending wherever you are,
I think we might have lost Rex a bit there, but Helen, do you want to tell us what we just listened to?
Yeah, we just listened to, it brings back a lot of memories. And hello, by the way, thank you for this opportunity and a wonderful space to promote the importance and the key importance of communications and the role that it has to ensure that voices from around the world join together in redefining our future. And this song that we heard brings back a lot of memories. It really is a song of peace, but it is a song of voices. When I arrived in Mali, before my current position, I was stationed in Mali in 2014, brought in to set up a radio station, a national radio station, to accompany the UN peacekeeping operations. And, you know, it wasn't that easy because Mali, of course, has a lot of different communication channels. But the purpose of this radio station was really to take a different focus and to go and ensure that there was one united communications tool that went from communities to the capital. The purpose of this radio station in particular was to start creating a possibility for voices of the many different and diverse communities and rural communities across Mali to start, first of all, being able to speak to each other in a context that was just coming out of conflict, to speak about what had happened, but also to be able to promote their own culture, their own local knowledges, and their own language. Never had there been a radio station at a national level where you could hear other languages other than French and Bambara, which were the official languages. But let's not forget Tamashek. Let's not forget Arabic. Let's not forget the many other languages, Songhai, the many other languages in Mali. And the importance of recognizing the multi-dimensionality of a country like Mali, to be able to really get to the heart of the knowledge of local populations and to bring rural populations, because that is what the majority of Mali is made up of, to the table, to engage in discussions, to talk about their necessities to address some of the main issues they're facing when it comes to climate change, when it comes to the tensions they're facing in their communities to be able to grow their crops because of the conflict. The voice of women, it was extremely important to start carving out spaces for women to have a voice within the political future, but also a voice as farmers. Don't forget that 75% of the women are the ones who are farming the land, and they don't necessarily have access to land rights. And so this was also an opportunity to shape policy, but to reach to the policymakers and to the governments as this radio station came about. You know, I really thought with my team, when I came on board, I was alone starting this with a technical director, and we were drawing this radio station up on a little wall somewhere, with a lot of criticism, I have to say, of why this was needed. There were a lot of, you know, when the word got out that we were setting this up, there were a lot of protests, it led to a lot of contentious issues, but little by little, we built the narrative about how important this was. And once we finally launched with, you know, and this was an official launch, we got the frequencies to be able to do this, and allowed that every evening had a particular space dedicated to local languages. Every evening had a specific local language with specific local news and specific information that was going to and from rural farmers in terms of their particular areas, and the necessity to address and to have education in terms of and technical information in terms of how to address some of the challenges they were facing. And it became extremely popular. One, to be able to reduce tensions. Two, to be able to engage youth and women, protect youth from being recruited by illegal armed forces, as they were actually, through these radio programs, given the opportunity to join other networks and really participate in projects that were funded thanks to all of this advocacy and communications to work their lands. There's a lot that's happened since this radio station came about and was officially launched in 2015 with the Minister of Communications himself and the president at the time. And this radio station quickly became the most listened to Migado FM because it was by Malians for Malians. And it was really based on public, you know, a public radio type of model to support populations in what they need the most, to address the sustainable development goals through the necessary importance of dialogue. And that's really what we're talking about here. Dialogue in and of itself, communications in and of itself, is core to be able to move the needle on the 2030 agenda. It's not just a support mechanism. It is truly operational when we're talking about engaging, you know, populations into the possibility of becoming actors of change. And if they do not have a voice, they cannot be expected to participate in the change that is even being offered or solutions. And let us not forget that, you know, a lot of rural populations around the world, whether we're in Mali, whether we're in Sudan and South Sudan, where I spent 4 years, or in many other countries where I've worked, the importance of giving people a voice in the most remote areas, having them take part and be felt humanized, gives them then the opportunity to listen to others. If you don't do that, that is where conflict ensues, and that is where you go into a spiral of potential backlash, and therefore it stalls development, and it stalls progress, it stalls their opportunity to enter a circular economy. So I hope that's, that gives you a little bit about my passion that I've put my life into, really participating in the livelihoods of rural communities to ensure that they have the microphone.
Great. It looks like we have Rex back. So Rex, are you able to ask Helen the next question here?
Thank you. I hope you can be able to hear me.
Yes.
Sorry, I lost my connection and I had to connect quickly to a genset, and really issues of power and energy can affect communication. Moving on, Helen, you have talked very clearly about the importance of voices and dialogue. How do you think organizations at the global level, even regional level, need to be approaching communications as part of their work in food systems?
I think it's important that they understand how key it is, and that they approach communications not as kind of the last thing they think about to be able to promote their actions, but actually at the core of what is driving their strategic directions, their actions, and the engagement in terms of solutions. Because communications is really the tool that enables to create that opening for possibilities moving forward. And you know, communication is education, is action, is change. Let's not forget that. And education is a very broad, but at all levels, right? It means that the knowledge that rural populations have, they have a tremendous capacity of resilience and knowledge that needs to be shared, and that can be shared with other communities, and that, you know, where they can come up with sustainable and regenerative solutions. We're talking about also, you know, when we look at food systems, we need to really understand, I think, that you know, the healthy food systems are integral right now to global resilience and peace. And if we act now, we can remake the ways we grow, sell, consume food in a way that leaves the world better fed and healthier overall. And to do that, we have to diversify our crops. We have to rethink how we consume food. We have to pay much more attention to the people who provide us our meals, the people behind our plates. And all of that needs to be pinned on proper communication and dialogue. Because how are we going to move this forward? How are organizations be able to even earmark their funds for this if this is not properly communicated and understood? Empowering small-scale farming, I think, which already is responsible for producing more than half the world's caloric intake, is the key to a more productive, ecologically sane future. And as you pointed out in the introduction, in September 2021, the UN will conduct a first of its kind food summit to transform the way the world produces and consumes food. And that is really key to how also the issues under there are communicated. And that is why it's so important to get the small scale farmers at the table in their voices. They are the keepers of biodiversity. They hold a knowledge base of how to best cultivate and harvest non-traditional crops. They're the masters of conservation of their lands. And we know that biodiversity is essential for maintaining ecosystems-based services, such as the provision of water and food for human, animal, and plant life. And so the irony, though, is that despite everything they do for the planet, small farmers are for the most part invisible, both economically and politically. About 80% of the world's extreme poor, 75% of the moderate poor live in rural areas. Of these, 76% and 60% respectively work in agriculture. And Indigenous peoples, women, and youth are particularly vulnerable to this acute poverty. And that is why it is extremely important to invest in rural people. And investing in rural people also means investing in communications to give them that voice. So, if we have the work that we're doing right now, for instance, from IFAD, which is the International Fund for Agricultural Development, which is investments enabled 50 million people to improve their production, to access markets, 26 million people to improve their resilience. But there needs to be more and smarter investments from governments in the private sector if the planet is to make this critical transition. And again, all of this will be linked and is linked to the importance of communication networks. I really like how you started this, Kevin, when you talked about communication is at the center of nervous systems, whether we're talking about our body, whether we're talking about the forest, and that is really what we're talking about here. If we want to create and move forward on this critical transition, communication and education will lead to action, will lead to change. But that needs to be at the core of strategies going forward, including within this Food System Summit. And I think it's the first time that there's widely this call for independent dialogues, national dialogues, understanding that solutions can only work if they are based on people-based solutions. And so that's really where we're at right now.
Thank you so much, Helen, for your elaborate explanation of where we are now. And indeed, you have confirmed that investing in the rural people means also investing in communications. Therefore, moving along, we want to now watch or hear another video, which is basically coming all the way from Ghana, because farmers' voices are critical. Let's hear it.
Midindi ndombi kwaku dudu no afra mi jeje na medo abro banche na afa beans na medo ewo konkron pe atibubu bono is region ne say sa wo hwe radio de na eya ebre na omude ye program no eswa na edikan no nti nkansem bi a mepese mebisa no be hu say menya mbisa na yese ebre aso na agric mpanyimfo no so omuswa nam so omu no so nti no omuntumi emma akuafo no nyina nche maako nti eno nko ani akwanside bi a eta ha emma nsam no yanya no se de yepe.
Wow, you can really confirm that indeed there are many challenges that farmers are faced with. And this takes us to our second poll. Please make sure that you participate in this poll. Our second question of the day is, what do you think is the biggest barrier to communicating with local farmers? What do you think is the biggest barrier to communicating with local farmers? I give you 30 seconds to make your choice. That's one choice and submit. Thank you. Let's wait. What would be the results of this poll? Make your choice. What is the biggest barrier in communicating with local farmers? Wow. So we can see from results that literacy is coming out number 2, with access to technology as number 1 barrier. but also cultural barriers and language, including the issues of infrastructure, are critical matters that are affecting effective communication with local farmers. Therefore, coming from that experience of understanding the barriers that farmers face in communication, our next speaker is all about engaging with and communicating with farmers, involving them in the whole process of what they do. Allow me to introduce our next speaker, who will be Lily Akofa Kilodome, all the way from Accra, Ghana, and she is the head of farmer and partner engagement at Farmerline. But first, before she speaks about inclusion of farmers' voices, let's hear some audio from one of the many ways they work with and communicate with farmers.
Hello, Mediae Akusia. Me adwuma de ma Farmerline dwumako no. My uncle fo a ye buakuafo, ma onya mfaso a ete ho da wa afanan nyina mu. A me de wie mu nsakra adwumadie ho nsem ebesom wo. Wo miamia enjito bresha ase e wo ne pepeye mu di kosi ne mroso no. No ba ye gi ahyase so ne mreso. Na opebre ne hya ase ni mremu no. Ye kanfo se akuafo bedua no ba ya eso ahodo se de be ya. Obegu won fet ne mreso ne kwan so.
Wow, some is on the air. So Lily, can you tell us a little more about what we are just hearing from this audio piece, Lily?
Yes, so this audio is a message that we sent to the farmers. It's in the Tree language, one of the Ghanaian languages. And it was basically talking about preparing for the rainy season, what recommendations we have from the farmers based on findings from the meteorological agency and what they needed to, which actions they needed to take to prepare for the rainy season.
Wow, great message and so many ways of sending messages to farmers. And Lily, a lot of the work at Farmerline is modeled around the food system itself in terms of the so many functions in the value chain. You do everything from training, providing access to finance, weather information, talking books, name it. Why is communication with farmers at the base of what you do at Farmerline, Lily?
Okay, thank you very much, Rex. I believe this is a very good platform to actually dialogue on the importance of communication. So in our work, we've realized that there's so much relevant information, useful information that actually should benefit farmers. But there's a big disconnect. Farmers do not have access to this information. Talk of the Googles, talk of LinkedIn, where there's so much information going around. Talk about books. In the poll that we just did, you realize that literacy was one of the key issues. Languages was also one of the key issues that came up there. We have the Facebooks. We also have research platforms where people share their research findings that could be useful to smallholder farmers or farmers in general in the food system area. However, there's a big disconnect. So we think that communication will play a very big role in getting farmers to have these information, which are very relevant to them, in making sure that they produce healthy and nutritious food for everyone in the world. So, and then making sure that this information is available on time. I think that the timeliness of the resources or the information is something that we realize that communication also comes to play. Yeah.
Wow, so it's not just about right information, relevant information, but timely information. And from your opinion, why do you think farmers ought to be included in the conversation, Lily?
So the reason we think that farmers need to be included is that they are faced with very unique challenges. In the poll that we just did, interestingly, these are some of the things we were looking at. With our work, we realized that literacy plays a very big role. So if you have farmers that you are supporting facing very unique challenges, you need to go down to them to understand what the real challenges are so that you can build solutions that fits their needs. So there was the first audio or video that spoke about, that a farmer from Malawi spoke about. He said that the government is doing so many things for them, but not things that they need or things that they are interested in. And we believe that when you go down to the farmers, using a human-centered approach, you get to understand what the farmers actually need, and then you can build solutions around that with some of their ideas, and also with the expertise that you have, you can work together to build solutions that are very useful to them. And then at the end of the day, you realize that whatever solutions you are giving to them are things that are going to be used by them. Usually when we have like the top-down approach, farmers, or usually everybody, will just take the other like backslidden approach and not really involve themselves. But when they are included in the process, there's a lot of ownership that comes with it, and then they also play a role in making sure that that solution or that intervention works at the end of the day. So these are some of the things that we use when we are building our solutions. One thing that I would also want to add is that we also try to create various avenues where farmers can also share some feedback on the solutions we have built. I don't know if there's enough time, but I can also talk about in the very first time when we launched or we piloted our solution, which was an SMS way to communicate to farmers. It was one of the very critical things we learned. We learned that because of the illiteracy levels that are amongst farmers or people in the rural communities, they are not able to understand the information in real time. So they have to look for someone to translate the language, the message to them. It could be miscommunicated, and then the information will not be used in real time. So that was something we learned quickly, and we had to innovate and then start using their local languages in voice. It came with extra cost, but yes, we are working to involve farmers. We want to help farmers, smallholder farmers. So we had to go back to them to get feedback. And that's how I think we can involve farmers in the process and make our communication platforms more inclusive.
Wow. Farmer-centered solutions are very, very critical for effective food systems. And indeed, we are hearing from Farmer Line that let's make sure that all the solutions are the ones that farmers are looking for. So as you wrap up today, Lily, you might want to share with us some key lessons that you want us to take moving forward in terms of how inclusive communication pathways can affect and indeed make sure our food systems are equitable and healthy food systems. Really.
Okay, so I'll say that everyone has very unique interventions that they have for farmers. But first, you know what areas that you're an expert in. The farmers are experts in what they need or what their challenges are. So first, let's go to them. Let's interact them from the beginning, not when we have built the solutions and everything is set in stone before we get to them. So let's involve them from the start. And then also as we start rolling out our interventions, our programs, our services, and our products, let's get back to them, communicate with them, get feedback regularly and consistently. And let's look for other ways where we can still engage farmers. I think it's really interesting how you're getting polls from farmers all around the globe. I think that there are very active, very innovative ways, thanks to technology, where we can still communicate with farmers. Farmer Line here, we've looked at various ways we can do this, using a virtual call center, using field agents on the ground who will give us feedback based on whatever we are training the farmers on. Farmers can call you and they are very honest about what their thoughts are. And that's something that we really cherish, because if there's no honesty, it means you're not getting good information. But once there's honesty from their end, you can really work on that feedback to improve the food systems we are all trying to aim at improving.
Thank you so much, Lily from Farmer Line. Indeed, we have had a lot of lessons and the issues of feedback, issues of need of engagement, dialogue, having multiple options, honest opinions are very critical for inclusive communication pathways. We thank you so much for your presentation and engagement this day as we continue this dialogue on the role of communication platforms for an efficient and effective food system. Now let's go to our next poll. So our next poll is building on what we've been hearing from Farmer Line, and our question is, if your organization communicates with farmers, how does it do it? If your organization communicates with farmers, how do you really do it? What are the options of the platforms that you use? This time around, you have got a chance for multiple choices. Choose one option. Let's do this in the next 30 seconds. Let's go. Don't just watch, participate, please. Go and do the polls now. Wow, here are our results. Interesting, interesting. Okay, so the people who are participating in this dialogue today are saying we are doing communication a lot through the radio, through mobile phones, and indeed the extension agents. And of course, a few of us have talked about the role of social media, the need for internet, including television, but also in print. But it looks like radio, mobile platforms, and face-to-face extension are the key ways how we are communicating with farmers. But there are new innovative ways how others are doing this communication. That's why I want us to introduce our speaker. And our next speaker is coming from an organization that is communicating with farmers in very creative ways. They combine entertainment with education, using a very different medium of communication, which is television. And today we shall learn more why television. Therefore, allow me to introduce Patricia Gichinga, who is the head of productions at the Mediae company. The Mediae company is well known for their television programs in Kenya and indeed in the whole of East Africa, known as Shamba Shepa, of which we'll play a few seconds here. Let's enjoy.
I wonder what our farmers thought when they heard we were coming.
I was shocked. Sema, aya? You know, my husband came singing, Shamba Shepa Pioe. Sema, so what are you talking about? So I said, Shamba Shepa, they are coming. Sema, what? How? And it was a big surprise.
Well, we like to surprise people.
I'm really very happy. Advice that we have got from the Shamba Shepa will take us a great mile. We'll be able to insure our crops. That is a very good thing.
I've learned a lot because I've been doing farming, but now I think I can do it better. I want to produce more so that I can be able to feed my children. Even have a surplus which I can sell and be able to pay for their school fees and other expenses which are required.
Once again, let's welcome Patricia Gichinga all the way from Nairobi, Kenya. Tell us more about the importance of entertainment in the education processes of farmers. Patricia.
Thank you, Rex, for that introduction. Speaking with farmers and speaking with your audiences is very important. And we at the Mediae company, what we do is we try to support education and development using various medias. So we first started out in radio back in the 90s. We had a program called Tembeana Majira. Tembeana Majira was just a local program that tackled social issues. And we ran that for about 12 years. And we started seeing the numbers dropping. So by 2000, we were at 7.4. And then by 2002, our numbers had dropped to about 2 million listeners. So we decided to find out, what was happening. And at that time, two things were happening in the Kenyan market. There was the introduction of a black wall TV set of China. So there was a little black and white television set that was getting into the market, which was equivalent to the cost of a goat. And you could, power that with a battery and you could watch television. Then secondly, in Kenya, what was happening is that the FM stations had been now regulated. So we had moved from just having one radio station to now, a lot of FMs. And we also found that with the FM stations, it was very difficult for us to put in any edutainment content. So it was music, a call-in session of how to catch a good guy or how to get a beautiful woman. And then again, news of the hour and then music. So we found it really difficult. So it's with this research, we decided we needed to maybe make a shift and go into television. And our model has been quite simple. Our model is edutainment. So what we seek to do is to entertain as well as educate people in this process. And that way we are able to build big audiences. So we started off by first a drama show called Makutano Junction. It covered all sorts of issues. We had governance issues, we had corruption issues, we had health, gender, nutrition. But once in a while, we also did some, agricultural content. And we found that every time we aired anything that was agricultural, for example, how to make silage, that the audience was very interested and wanted to know more. So from our research, we found that from Makutano Junction, which had an audience of about 6 million, that 70% of these audiences were either peri-urban or rural. So hence the interest of agriculture. It was with this that we then now started our reality show called Shamba Shape Up. And the model has really been very effective in terms of supporting scale up for large interventions. So we're able to build big audiences. We're able to make these interventions scalable. With Shamba Shape Up, what it is, it's a makeover on smallholder farms. Usually we'll go to our farm and ask, we'll ask John, like, what are your problems? He'll say, I have problems in producing my maize. I have problems in my beans and my dairy farming is not good. Then we come in with experts who will then advise John on how to farm better, increase his productivity on his farm, and hence, increase the income in the family farm. So with Shamba Shape Up, we've been doing that for a number of years. I could ask if you could move to the next slide. We do now have an audience of about 8 million. And what we tend to do in this, when we're trying to do this with Shamba Shape Up, it's we try and build a solution. The solution is education. So in order for farmers to farm better, they need access to good inputs. They need access to finance in order to buy those inputs. And then they also need a guaranteed market. So what we tend to do is we combine all these three things into an educational package, and we're able to broadcast. We currently have about 8 million people. We broadcast this the beginning of the growing season. So here in East Africa is usually in March. So we broadcast between March and September. And in March, we are telling people the main things like how to prepare your land, how to select your seeds, how to do a soil test. And then as we go through the season, what we do is we also then are following the growing season. So we'll be telling you when to weed, when to top dress your crops. And then when it comes to harvesting and markets, we are also advising farmers. And with this, what we do is we choose a farm in a different location. And this is then broadcast nationally to the 8 million audience. So people are able to learn and to watch this. And the reason we actually use TV is because people in Kenya who own TVs are actually in the cash economy. So what we tend to do is try and catch these early adopters who will watch the program, make a change, and then go to the other people who are in the lower social economic level. When you ask them what's your trusted source of information, it's friends and neighbors. So when they see this friends and neighbors making an increase, then they also then try and find out about Shamba Shape Up. So it's at this point where we adapt the program into a radio program. So it's also broadcasted into radio. Part of the things that we have done, we've been running for the last 12 years now. We've also now been able to do a lot of research. During the third or fourth year of Shamba Shape Up, what we did is we did a big piece of research, and we found that we went and researched with 13,000 farmers, and out of this, we could only do two things. We could only research with maize and dairy. And this is because with dairy, they sell to the cooperative. So there was some sort of records because a lot of farmers don't keep records. And we found that farmers who had been watching Shamba Shape Up and had implemented the changes that they had seen showed that there was a big benefit to these farmers. And this was directly linked to the program. And we found that 28,000 households had improved in this. And this was directly translated into the economy for about $24 million. And this was just after 3 years of doing this. It's during this period, again, we found that farmers were watching the show, going to our website, calling, finding the number, calling our director and saying, hello, is this Shamba Shape Up? My cow is sick. And we were like, we are TV producers, we are not agriculturalists. So we found that we needed to also have a backup system. So that prompted us to create something called iShamba. And iShamba is essentially a mobile backup system for Shamba Shape Up. So what happens is people watch the program, and at the end of the program, we say, if you want more information or about what you have seen, get in touch with us. And you send the word join, and our call center person will call you up. They get your name, they get your location, because we send you weather for your area. We also ask you the location because we also want to send you market prices, because that's a challenge with farmers, especially when brokers come up into the farm and people feel that the broker will say, well, a bag of maize is going for X shillings, which is not true. So at least now our farmers have the right price there and they can make an informed decision. So that's what we do with iShamba. And we currently, to date, have about 450,000 farmers sitting on our database. We know where they are, we know what they're farming. And they also have access to the call center where they can call during certain times of the week, just to get more information. And currently what we've done is that we've seen there's also been a rise of smart farmers who've come in. And these smart farmers do have a smartphone, so it's quite useful. So we've put them into WhatsApp groups, and the WhatsApp groups are very active. So people take photos and send it to us, and it's been really interesting. We also have interactive tools. So we have all our programming on Knowledge Zone. We also have our social media, and we also have booklets and Budget Mkononi, which is just like a mobile app. I think we can go to the next one. So with Shamba Shape Up, what we're doing is we're scaling out to different countries, and our main focus right now is on climate change adaptation. And we are moving into Uganda and Ethiopia in the next 2 years, still with the same format, but now using local languages to scale up this intervention that has worked in Kenya. So yeah, so really happy to be speaking to all of you about this intervention and what it's, how it's worked for us and how it's going on in the future. Over to you, Rex.
Thank you so much, Patricia, for wonderful insights in terms of the way we can combine entertainment with education. And we've also heard from Patricia that the issue of the convergence of different platforms is also very critical, knowing that people may have different tastes in terms of the kind of communication tools that they have available. And indeed, social media is also coming out as an interesting arena in terms of communication in Kenya, as we have heard from Patricia, and indeed the whole importance of feedback is very, very critical. And we are seeing that communication indeed can ensure and raise demand for services. Therefore, for an effective food system, there is need to ensure that we're being responsive to the demands of the farmers, and this can come out when we're using our communication platforms. Thank you so very much, Patricia, for an insightful presentation. Therefore, this takes us to our last farmer video and indeed our last also polling question, but let's see the video first.
Madam Traore Ajamalado Jate, Ne Chicala, Akara Guanmayo, Akara Jamaga Joglu, Akara Banmane, where maybe a resumalo, Anganga Farano, Farane, Casimica. I'm African, who make a cheat to a Senate. Well, I'm not to a Senate, I'm better, I'm a Benesenate, I'm better, and Anika Sere, who can Chinchinaku, a man who many one jingle door not many answer that I look by a like a sabati, never been for this. But I'm not karate, baby was as and now my getting was satisfied.
Wow. If you don't involve us, then it's not part of us. That's a key message coming all the way from that wonderful woman in Mali, that let's exchange before you do anything, before any decisions are made in the Sustainable Development Goals. Let's engage the farmers, because we don't want to miss the target in terms of what they are looking for, what their needs are. Therefore, let's go to our last poll question of the day. This one, you can't miss it. Let's all participate. And our last poll question is, how do you involve farmers in your projects? How do you involve farmers in your project? You've got a chance for multiple choices. Let's do this in the next 30 seconds. This is your last chance to have your voice heard, because this polls will be part and parcel of the synthesis of the game-changing solutions that we want to be part and parcel of the presentations at the pre-summit coming on the 26th and the 28th of July this year, and indeed, including what will be happening at the September summit. Participate in the poll quickly so that we can proceed. Here are our results. How do you involve farmers in your projects? So 72% of the participants here are saying we conduct baseline research with the farmers. And others are saying we give them opportunities to give feedback throughout the project. And others are saying we involve them in the design and proposal of our project. Only 44%, which means maybe our projects are really not demand driven, the need for change. And that's why communication is very, very important. And indeed, lastly, some of us are saying that just on a recipient. Coming from that experience in terms of the way we involve farmers, only on baseline, others are saying, yes, throughout the process. We want to hear more now from our final speaker. And our final speaker is Sylvie Harrison. She is the manager of Radio Craft at Farm Radio International. Remember, radio was one of the key areas that you said as participants you use in communicating with farmers. Farm Radio works with local broadcasters across sub-Saharan Africa to design and develop radio programs that educate and encourage farmers about new practices, bring in dialogue about different issues. And now I want to give a chance to Sylvie, but before we do that, let's hear one of those programs that are produced by Farm Radio International and aired through our network of radio partners across Africa.
mais e nder ɗum noon mi wawi irde tan mi artat e technicien am o las mbalo par ce que men liggotat e kala ɓe vraiment ɓe gandananta e min mbawa wiide ilisa o ɗum woni noddoɓe ɗon ɓe gokkira hen miijo mum kala hen caɗele muɗum mo wawa en tan hettinde ɓen ɗon yimɓe pour mbawen artude e nder émission meɗen konngol ndemoɓe ɗo e radio ɓamtare dowri fm 92.5 technicien mo las mbalo
demantere andi wattami rewnade réseau social ɗinin ko caɗele ɗen ko ɗum waɗi ɗide ko wiyamen bele gara e demantere amin meeɗaɗo yede facebook meeɗaɗo yede whatsapp ɗum koto martero mi yera ma lumo jiɗe mi yera demantere
min Mariatu Balde Mario Pagnani affaire ɗo demantere min natina ɗo seeɗa e réseau social ɗum ɗan min gollirami haajuji amen demantere ndi affaire ɗum mo ƴatti ɗon tamminen ase ɗon pire guerte ɗe mbelani ase ɗon pire guerte ɗe mbelani
musidal fuladu ko enen nandi ɗum ɗo rewɓe vraiment on nani koɓe kaali ko fi caɗele wawgol tan yeyde ndemanteri maɓɓe ndi e whatsapp walla e facebook ɗum noon mi wawa artude tan e invité am ɓo vraiment Mamadou Diawo entrepreneur ɗo e commune mbo Kandia wawde wiide tan e hunde nafoore mbo avantage e jeeygol e facebook walla e whatsapp
donc avantage uji manam moƴƴereji gonɗi e nder jeygu ɗum.
Wow, this is interesting in a local language. That's one of the power of radio. Let's welcome Sylvie to take us through a presentation. And as she starts, she'll tell us a little bit of what we just heard from that radio piece. Sylvie.
Thanks, Rex. So this was a radio program that was done in Kolda in Senegal. And they were basically discussing the idea of being able to buy and sell products using social media, so Facebook and WhatsApp specifically. And the callers were expressing some of the difficulties that they were having with that. And the guest that came right after that was preparing to do an interview around some of the ways that we can make it easier for them to use those technologies in order to participate in the buying and the selling of products. And I think it's an interesting way to start the conversation because we have here farmers who are expressing challenges that they're facing with a proposed practice, with something that we are suggesting that they do. And I think that radio allows us to have those conversations and to bring different people involved at different steps of the food system to really talk to one another. And so this is one example of a phone-in, but there are other ways that radio can bring those people together, panels and with other technologies like mobile phones, where people can send in their questions and share some of their opinions and their points of view when it comes to these proposed practices. And radio allows us to do that and really expand the conversation and not be in a scenario where we are only, giving information or disseminating messages. And so that dialogue is possible through radio. And at Farm Radio, we have a very specific way in which we involve stakeholders and everyone involved in preparing radio programs. And so getting on the air, so many things have happened before we even get on the air. So of course, there's the process of formative research and where farmers are involved, and other people who are involved in the food system as an example, but in all of the work that we do around sexual and reproductive health and all of the other areas. And that formative research helps us to understand what it is that we're looking at, as far as the landscape of this situation is. And then we go through a process of a design process. And that's sort of twofold in the sense that Farm Radio has developed different types of radio programs, so different styles of radio programs that are able to achieve different kinds of results. And so depending on what it is we are working with and what kind of results we're looking for, we will choose different radio types. So that can be drama plus, which means a drama with a discussion plus a discussion. It can be a participatory radio campaign that brings people through a series of very specific steps around making decisions and what it is that we need to discuss and ask questions about in order to make an informed decision. And there are several other types of radio programs that Farm Radio has developed to do this. The other facet of that radio program design is the content. So what is it that we want to discuss, to have conversations about on the radio? And so there's a process that includes farmers and other stakeholders, other organizations. There are representatives of the radio stations that are involved. And this is where we have discussions around what it is that we want to talk about. And we come up with our plan for that weekly programming. This is also a time where we discuss the types of guests that we need to have on the radio to have those discussions. We follow up with broadcaster training. We work with already established radio stations that have teams, and some of those radio stations are very large. They have, very experienced teams. Other radio stations are very small. They work with volunteers. Some of the broadcasters, we were talking about literacy issues earlier when it comes to farmers. That same thing exists in certain cases with broadcasters. So we do training with all of the broadcasters that we work with in order to not necessarily teach them how to be broadcasters. Many of them know this, they are professionals in their field, but to look at what it means to do radio for development. What does it mean to be looking at social and behavior change communication and how that influences the way we ask questions, the way we conduct interviews. We of course have production and broadcast, and this is a weekly, parts of it is pre-recorded, but most is done live week to week. And so there is a lot of flexibility for reaction, course correction, and we can respond directly to the feedback that is coming through on our mobile platform. And every week there is quality assurance happening and that interactivity. So we have a mobile platform called Uliza that is shared with the broadcasters, and questions are uploaded that allow us to see what current practices are when it comes to these different topics, what people's opinions are, if they have any questions. They can also share their innovations, so how they're dealing with some of these issues. So it really gives us that very immediate possibility of having those conversations. And then, of course, because we're mixing this participatory element, so having farmers and different players in the food system, for example, share with us what is important to them as far as conversations go. There's, of course, that hybrid of results-based, and so there's monitoring and evaluation. So Farm Radio does this for all of all of the projects that we're involved with. And we stay with radio, and we continue to insist that it needs to be part of those communication tools. It should not be the only way, but it still needs to be a major component, because we know that between 80 to 90% of households in Africa have access to a working radio set. But even with radio being so accessible, we are partnering that up with other types of technologies. So as part of the conversation that we just heard, in that radio clip, we were talking about WhatsApp, Facebook. We use mobile phones to get that feedback. But there is a power imbalance. And that power imbalance often stems from lack of information around a certain issue. And when we combine radio and mobile phones and other types of technologies and other types of communication methods, we are able to have conversations. And so one of the key factors with the radio programs is in our plan, in our design, we have made certain decisions about the types of information we want to talk about. Then it comes down to the actual dialogue that happens between extension workers, different players in the food system, farmers, all of those people that are involved. And so there's a conversation happening, and that's unscripted. That's, goes beyond the idea of disseminating messages. And this is where we get into the real stuff, the good stuff, I think. We have to remember that there are still gaps, there are still power imbalances, there are still unequitable, areas, even when using the most available technologies. So there's a gender gap in mobile ownership. There is a gender gap in internet usage. And so we have to take that into consideration. And when looking at what we're trying to accomplish, I'd like to suggest flipping the
Did we just have Sylvie freeze there? We'll give her a couple seconds to see if she comes back, and then if not, we will carry on.
Hello? Hello, hello?
You are back.
Okay. So I'm suggesting a little bit of a flip of the script. We talk about this idea of farmers being invited at the table. And I like to think about, whenever I hear that or other iterations of that same sort of metaphor, is that implies that we own the table. And so I'd like us to think about, you know, ways in which we are working as NGOs and as funders as well. How are we making sure that we are invited at their table, that farmers and rural people feel that they can trust us, they understand what it is that we do, and that we are invited to their table. And I think that that's what Madame Traoré was saying in her video, is that too often people come into communities, they have projects, and we've done a lot of research, and we you know, have good foundations, but they don't necessarily feel like they have been part of all of that. And so, you know, when looking at this quote, participatory communication proposes a shift. So it's not about the ends, the messages, the dissemination of information, but instead it's moving towards conversation, dialogue, trying to understand one another, all of the people that are involved in the food system, and really seeing how important it is for us not only to encourage and motivate and make it easier for farmers to do what it is we need them to do, but also how do we change how we do things, or how do different players in the food system along the way, what are some adjustments that we can make and they can make that will move towards what it is farmers want and need. And I will actually skip over the next slide, Tara, and just go to the last one. Thank you. And I think, you know, one of the things, the first conversation I ever had with our executive director, Kevin, the first conversation that I ever had with him, he said, our job is to share information, the challenges and the successes, in order for farmers to be able to make an informed decision. And I think, you know, this quote by Paulo Freire illustrates that nicely, in the sense that we need to make space for critical thinking, and not just this idea that, okay, people understand what it is that we're looking for, and we're now able to move forward, but rather, again, flip that script in the sense that, am I doing what I need to be invited to those tables, to really truly understand and hear what it is that small-scale farmers require to move forward. And that relates to the food system and all of the different people in the food system, but also to our work as NGOs, as international NGOs, as local NGOs, and in communication for development. Are we being invited to their table, and getting the information that we need to move forward with farmers in a way that they feel included? And that's, and not just included, but leading the process. And I think radio, you know, just looping back to the conversations on the radio, and this idea of being unscripted and sometimes getting surprises and having to move and have that flexibility, I think is really important for us. And we want to continue and you know, continue to see how we can expand those conversations and those dialogues. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sylvie, for great insights into the participatory communication approaches that Farm Radio International does, and which is critical as we look at this conversation of bringing farmers to the table. And rightly, Sylvie has said, let's change it. Let's bring ourselves to the table of farmers, because we need to listen to them. Let's have dialogue with them. And as we indeed do the dialogue, it's where we've got communication, and that communication will help us to have food systems that are responsive to the needs of the greatest actor in the systems approach, the farmer himself and herself. For these next 7 minutes, we just want to highlight some few questions that have been asked. A lot has already been happening in the chat and also in the questions and answers in terms of the issues that people are raising as part of this dialogue. And we'll be finishing indeed by all means at 1:30. So let's hear for 1 minute from Helen Papa, a question from Jean Christie. She asks, what organizational relationships are important for the International Fund for Agriculture Development for good, ongoing, and consistent communications with farmers? Is it with farmers' organizations or women's organizations or private sector actors? What are these and how do you build upon them? What's your take, Helen? A minute, please.
Thank you for this conversation, for this very good question, rather, which would take more than a minute to respond to. But IFAD has long recognized farmer organization and women rural networks as central stakeholders defending the interests of poor rural people, and has stepped up actually its efforts and support to build their capacity. It's also increased its collaborations with the farm organizations as interlocutors and partners in development programs and in policy dialogue, both as representatives of rural producers, but also as institutions delivering services to their members and playing a major role in rural development. And so since 2006, to give you a bit of background, the IFAD Farmers Forum, the FAFO, has been the framework guiding the partnerships and providing direction for its development. So it is absolutely crucial. Partnerships with farmer organizations as well as women rural networks linked to the farmer organizations have showcased the relevance and effectiveness and long-term sustainability of the importance and the action supported by IFAD. And you know, they're considered key partners of IFAD funded projects to make sure that we are improving targeting of the operations so that they're relevant, very similar to what we said, that they make sure that we are bringing the rural voices, not only in dialogue, but also to guide us in the particular projects that are key to address rural development as we move forward.
Thank you so much, Helen. Let the rural voices guide us in our investments and design of programs and projects. A very key message moving forward, and this message ought to be indeed amplified at the summit. Going to you, Patricia, how do you ensure that the tools are integrated into the government system of communicating so that there is sustainability? So as you use all the communication tools, is there a chance to link that to government or public communication systems so that we can ensure sustainability? So as Patricia answers that question, we have been requested that we can go over by another 10 minutes so that we can still give more room for this engagement of questions and answers. So I indulge you that let's still remain for another 10 minutes to finalize this engagement for questions and answers. Patricia, what are your experiences of public sector involvement?
Thank you, Rex, and thank you for that question. Public sector involvement is very important in our work because we cannot produce a show without them. So for example, on Shamba Shape Up, we do have the commercial sector, we do have government sector giving us the content. The commercial part comes in to show, you know, what the farmer needs to do, because a lot of farmers, as you know, may not be literate, may not be able to read and write very well. So when we bring in the commercial partners, they're able to, showcase a brand that people can recognize. And this is how we build sustainability. Well, Shamba Shape Up's been running for 12 years. And what we've done is we've worked with government. We still continue to work with government and with private sector. For example, with our iShamba, we sit on Safaricom, the DigiFarm platform, and we are able to disseminate all these SMSs because, as you know, if you're running any mobile tech solutions, the biggest cost is sending those messages. So you really have to engage with the private and also government in order to make this sustainable. That being said, the donor funding is still required because there are some things you cannot get a commercial partner, for example, climate change, or something to do with financial inclusion or nutrition. You're not going to get Coca-Cola to come and advise farmers. So there, in such instances, you still need the donor funding in order to scale up some of this so that it gets to the part where then a commercial partner will take. But for us, that's how it's worked. And there have been series where we've had 70% funding is from the commercial sector because that's the only way to make it sustainable. Yeah, I hope I've answered your question.
Wonderful. Sure. So it's not only about public sector, but also the interaction and partnerships with the private sector. So that's really important for us to note moving forward. And also another question that has come up, and I want Lily to handle this one, is how can we ensure that communication platforms are part of the crucial investments, just like the other facets of the food system? Because we do know that people think about communication as a last item on the budget. They always think about communication when they want just to finish the budget. And as I told you, over 150 independent dialogues, and this is the only one dealing with communication. So what do you think needs to be done to have investments in communications for food systems? Lily.
Okay, so I think that in the first place, we need to use platforms like these to emphasize the need for communication like we are doing. Like you mentioned, it's usually the last thing on the item. So more emphasis for people to understand the role that it plays. One of the things I would want to highlight is that if communication is left out, you should know that we are not reaching to the farmers. Like the farmers have spoken today. They've told us that people do not understand their problems. People they just push their solutions to them. So it plays a very critical role, and we need to prove that to donors, to investors, to anyone playing a role in investment in food systems, that communication has a very critical role to play in ensuring that we are reaching food security and all our SDGs. So more emphasis on the importance that we need to play, that communication plays in the food systems.
Thank you so much, Lily, and you're bringing out a very critical key takeaway point today, that if communication is left out of the investments in food systems, then we are going alone, leaving farmers behind. And we cannot be able to do that if we're going to have equitable and efficient and just food system. And there is one last question that we want to give to Sylvie from Farm Radio International. Somebody by the name of Priya Chetri is asking that she wants to know how the conversation and dialogues at all levels in the farming sector can be sustained, but also considering the COVID situation that has led to more isolation, and given the fact that access to communication tools in the rural areas is still poor, what can we do in these scenarios so that indeed we are inviting ourselves to the farmers' table when access is a big challenge? What is your take, Sylvie? Just a minute. Sylvie, please.
So I'll start with the first part of the question around sustainability. And one of the ways that Farm Radio is thinking about sustainability is working directly with ministries of agriculture in different countries, and creating programming that connects radio stations to the Ministry of Agriculture and to different communities. And so by choosing radio stations that are accessible and popular, which is one of the questions that we always ask when doing formative research, is who do you listen to? And we try to work with those radio stations. And having those partnerships and knowing that extension workers, as one of the farmers mentioned during the videos, there are fewer and fewer in some cases. And so connecting those systems together and working with those radio stations as a little bit of a hub, and doing some training and some capacity building around, well, how do we make decisions about agendas, what we're talking about, how to prioritize different topics. And so by doing that and integrating those radio programs into the national, regional, local systems, there's a bigger chance that those radio programs will continue even after we have that specific funding for that specific project around that specific topic is done. And so we're trying to look at those possibilities. For COVID-19, luckily, doing a phone-in on a radio program is still doable, and recording just as a phone conversation, if we want to interview people, is still doable. But there are certainly a lot of things that we need to learn and adapt based on this experience that we've just had. And I think for us, we really, shifted into high gear, and we wanted to look at what all of the recommendations are from, health authorities and all of that, and then think about what that actually means for the broadcasters in their day-to-day work. So one of the things that we did, and hopefully did well, was to develop tools and resources for broadcasters that would give them some of those paths on how do I continue my work in this context. And of course, because Farm Radio has a network of over 1,000 radio stations across sub-Saharan Africa, we were able to have discussions with them and find out, well, what are you doing? What's working for you in this scenario? And then share those in a wider network. And so I think it's all about that. It's finding those innovations and learning from what broadcasters are doing, and then sharing back to other broadcasters so they can all sort of learn from one another.
Thank you so much, Sylvie. Innovations is critical when we're faced with situations like COVID-19, and ensuring that we're using those communication platforms that can reach farmers in the rural areas. Signing off today, we want to ask a question to Helen. You have worked a lot in countries like Mali, where there is a strong legacy of community radio stations. How do you think we can leverage the community voices, those excluded voices, in these conversations on food systems? And you might also wish to talk about the work that we've launched together with you in terms of dialogues on air. I'll give you 2 minutes as we wrap up, Helen.
Thank you for that. How do we leverage the voices, and how do we get them into the dialogue? I think again, we've been dedicating this whole amazing session with these wonderful speakers on the different innovations in communication to ensure that we're opening spaces to bring them into the dialogue, that it is not just unilaterally sending information out, but actually for the participatory type of nature that is absolutely important. We've heard it even from the videos that you showcased, that we need to be part of this. We need to have our voice within this, or else this doesn't mean anything to us, right? We also, I think, so I think radio does remain extremely important, but radio attached to the many innovative platforms that have been rising up, the telephones, the networks, the polling, the questions, the possibilities now for communities to participate in a protective manner, and especially when I'm talking about women who aren't necessarily still today given the possibility to have a voice as free as a space as we should allow them to have. But now through the advent of these different possibilities, the WhatsApp groups, the different ways of communicating, even with low bandwidth, there are possibilities. But to bring that into where we need to orient, we do need to make sure as global communities that we speed up the development of internet capacity and of access to the worldwide networks to ensure that no one is left behind. And yes, of course, there are still also, and it's very important to not forget the traditional communication approaches. During COVID, for instance, in the most rural communities across Colombia and in the Amazon, and this is where I was posted just before, we used a lot of motorcycle and youth who were sending out information through the audífonos, I don't remember how you say that, through the big speakers, to make sure that people have the right information. And I think this is also what's important here. And I think everyone knows that when we develop communication networks to bring populations into this this network of information, we also never have to stop thinking that our role is also to ensure that information is the correct information, because disinformation, thanks to also all of this technology, is very harmful. Disinformation fuels conflict. Disinformation leads to deaths, right? And this is what we saw in COVID. And so we have a responsibility also to make sure that through these dialogues, we support people in understanding what the verified information is so that they themselves share verified information. So we have to remember that. And I think this is what we're bringing in, hopefully, through this partnership that IFAD is very happy to have established with Farm Radio International leading up to the Food Systems Summit, specifically in terms of these dialogues. The idea of these on-air dialogues through a broad-based community of network of community radio stations is really to ensure that we have those rural voices and farmers participate directly into the Food Systems Summit, and that really everything we've talked about is compounded through these next dialogue series, which hopefully will keep growing even after the Food Systems Summit, because this is absolutely key for us to redefine our future in a regenerative way, sustainably, as we move forward. And I think that what is really also important is to remember, why does this matter? Don't forget that farming didn't really interest that many global networks a few years ago, right? You wouldn't see farming on top of the top tier media front page, for instance. But today, there is a paradigm shift. This really recognition that, first of all, we need to go back to people, and that people include the most remote rural areas. So leaving no one behind is absolutely fundamental. And the other thing is that how we live our day-to-day lives, and the pandemic that we have just gone through, is very much linked to going back to the core of our livelihoods, which is rural development. We all eat every day. Everything that's in our food, regardless in our plates, regardless of where we are sitting in the world, goes back to the people who are growing it. And so they have so much to teach the world. And so it's time now to look back and to see, okay, what have we missed here in terms of moving forward on the development humanitarian nexus in the 2030 agenda and take action. This is really what I think we are starting to do. And I see this wonderful network of people here who are all working for the same purpose. And I'm really excited about this opportunity to further our work with Farm Radio International and being able to do that for the Food Systems Summit and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Helen. And you have rightly said it, that let's go back to the basics. The people who feed the world need to be at the center of the conversation. And indeed, dialogues are not an option, but a must, because farmers ought to guide us. Therefore, investing in communications, as we do in all other facets of the food system, is a way to go. We can't leave anyone behind. We need the voices of the farmers at the table where we are sitting, and also inviting ourselves to the table they are sitting. Communication is not just supplying information, it's basically listening to them. The feedback they give to us will change the way food systems perform in the future. We cannot meet, indeed, the goals under Sustainable Development Goals up until the farmer is central in the conversation. Let me thank all of you for coming to this dialogue. Let me appreciate Helen Papa once again. Thank you. Let me appreciate Lile Akofa Keladom all the way from Accra, Ghana. Thank you. Let me appreciate Patricia Gichinga, Nairobi, Kenya. Thank you. Thank you, Sylvie Harrison, all the way from Canada. And indeed, Clementina, sitting in East Africa, translating into French. We are very, very appreciative for all what we have done today. And indeed, our goal is to ensure that there are good, critical, worthy investments in communications as we continue to dialogue and see indeed that our food systems are equitable and efficient. The gender question came out very clearly. We need women's voices in all this discussion. And today we showcased that by having all our 4 panelists as women of power, women of substance. We appreciate you for showing the way to do it, that indeed women can also have a voice and be able to conclude and indeed engage in these conversations. Thank you so much all for attending, and we'll be sharing with you all these presentations on your registered emails. Have a very good day. Let's continue the conversation, because communication is about dialogue, and this dialogue is about putting the farmer at the center of it all. He and she is the one who brings food at our table. Thank you all. Have a good evening, good afternoon, good morning, good day. God bless you. Thank you. This marks the end of our webinar.